This is Mondaire Jones, outgoing, unfortunately, congressman from New York's 17th District. And the Judiciary Committee brought in this guy. His name is Reverend Robert Schenck. He is the president and founder of the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Institute. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but at one point he was a major anti-abortion activist, and he was, according to a letter he sent to the Supreme Court in the part in part of their investigation into the leak of the Hobbs decision draft. That is the one that reversed Roe v. Wade. He wrote a letter saying that he was told weeks, like 3 weeks before the Hobby Lobby decision came down, which was the Affordable Care Act decision that essentially said that this closely owned company, they called it, they came up with a new sort of device here. The religious owners didn't want to provide free contraceptive care to as part of their insurance plan. It really was costing them nothing. It wasn't a cost issue. It was that it had offended them. And via the conduit of some big right-wing donors, this man Schenck was made aware of the Hobby Lobby decision weeks in advance so that he could prepare his team to roll out their arguments and their responses to that decision. Here's an exchange, one of a couple, between Schenck and this one is Mondaire Jones in the House Judiciary Committee.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, gosh, sorry. Hold on.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. During oral argument this week in a case called 303 Creative, which threatens to undermine the rights of LGBTQ people in our economy to not be discriminated against, Justice Alito joked about black children dressing up in KKK costumes. His remarks caused many Americans to question his mental fitness. But even before his antics this week, Americans had reason to question his integrity. On November 19th, the New York Times published a bombshell report describing credible allegations that Justice Alito leaked both the outcome and the authorship of the court's 2014 opinion in Hobby Lobby to Gail and Don Wright of Centerville, Ohio. The Wrights were far-right donors to the Supreme Court Historical Society who were actually secret operatives for a radical anti-abortion group called Faith in Action. The mission of the Wrights and other operatives trained by Faith in Action was to ingratiate themselves with those justices who proved amenable, the Alitos, the Thomases, the Scalias, go figure, in order to influence Supreme Court decisions. The president of Faith in Action, who I'm grateful is testifying today, the former president, at the time called those operatives stealth missionaries, and their strategy worked. The Wrights became close friends of the Alitos and they dined in each other's homes. Sam and Martha Ann Alito even vacationed with Gail and Don Wright at their home in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which sounds incredible, by the way. I've never gone skiing in Jackson Hole. In clear evidence that Hobby Lobby, the results specifically, had been leaked and the author of it had been leaked, the New York Times described several contemporaneous emails and conversations from 2014, which confirmed that today's key witness, Reverend Schenck, was indeed aware of the outcome of the Hobby Lobby opinion and the identity of its author. The only way he could have known this is if Justice Alito had indeed leaked this information to Gail and Don Wright. That is common sense. And Justice Alito's hypocrisy, as well as the hypocrisy of some of my colleagues on this committee today, astounds me. It astounds me. And that is because in October of this year, while speaking at an event commissioned by the right-wing Heritage Foundation, Justice Alito referred to the leak of his draft opinion in Dobbs as a, quote, great betrayal of trust. A great betrayal of trust. Will Justice Alito use these same words to describe his own leak of the Supreme Court's decision in Hobby Lobby? And with this new information, why should any of us believe that he wasn't the person who leaked the Dobbs opinion? Again, more likely than not, given the evidence that we have before us. Justice Alito went on to say that, quote, someone crosses an important line when they say that the court is acting in a way that is illegitimate, and that he did not think anyone in a position of authority, quote, should make that claim lightly. Well, Justice Alito, your conduct as a member of the Supreme Court is directly responsible for the American public increasingly viewing the Supreme Court, unfortunately, as illegitimate. Keep up what you're doing. It's making a difference. Justice Thomas told Reverend Schenck. Reverend Schenck, thank you for your candor today. I know this has been very difficult, and you wouldn't be the first witness who my Republican colleagues have cast unfair aspersions on, but it's still shocking to hear some of the things that they're saying about you today and that they have said about you today, because you were just their friend a few years ago in their eyes. What do you think Justice Thomas meant when he said that it's making a difference, the work that you were doing?
The context of that, Congressman, was the work I had been doing introducing the individuals I refer to as stealth missionaries into the life of the court. I saw Justice Thomas in the hallway of the court, and he made a point to signal to me, and he said, keep up your good work. It's making a difference. The context of that was what we had been doing at the court for, at that stage, nearly 17 years.
And indeed that.
I mean, this is really, really incredible. Because what this guy was doing was literally trying to develop different relationships with his donors and courts and orchestrating these relationships. Like, I mean, obviously, like, look, this is not spy stuff, but the dynamics are very similar. Cozy up, go to the same country clubs, go to the same locations, go to the same vacations, become friends with them. And this is how it works. The donors go to the activist and say, how can we further your mission? Because it's our mission. And they say, we need you to enter into the social circles of these justices and work on them over years and years and years. And then Clarence Thomas knows this is going on and then gives encouragement. I mean, remember, this guy has a wife who is in these circles too. And we've been led to believe, like, oh, no, there's a firewall. This is really damning stuff. It really is damning stuff.
Because the social aspect is the point, right? In the sense that the fraternizing is the point. Like,
the point is that there are lobbyists working on these Supreme Court justices who are not lawyers, who are not there giving them legal briefs and legal arguments. These are just political lobbyists. This is why this should happen. And then they'll just outsource it to some clerks. Give us some, reverse engineer this. What do we have to say to make it seem reasonably plausible? It's a joke. It's a joke. Here is another clip. This is Schenck again talking to David Cicilline about the way in which they inserted themselves into the social circles of these Supreme Court justices.
This is shocking to me. But in addition to that work, was there also travel with supporters of the higher court campaign with justices of the Supreme Court, both to vacation destinations, vacation homes? And can you give some examples of some trips that the justices took, if any, with supporters of Faith in Action?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I was aware that Justices Alito and Scalia had visited the home, the second or third home, I'm not sure how they counted it, of the Wrights, Don and Gail Wright, in
Pause
Jackson
it.
Hole, Wyoming.
I just want to to be clear here. The Wrights are the big time donors of Schenck's former organization, who Schenck basically said, you know, the way that you can help us in our mission too is to ingratiate yourselves and to get into their social circles. They are the ones who told Schenck after a dinner with Alito that Hobby Lobby was going to be decided in the way that Schenck wanted it to, and that Alito was writing or had written the decision, and it was going to come out in 3.5 weeks, and it allowed Schenck to prepare for it. But it's, regardless of like what it allowed for, it was evidence of Alito's willingness to leak things. We also heard this from, in 2012 on the ACA decision, a different part of the ACA decision. This is an ongoing project by Alito at the very least. And the last clip told us that Clarence Thomas was also aware of this. This one is basically outlining how these big-time right-wing donors essentially got into the social circles of some of these right-wing Supreme Court justices.
The Wrights, Don and Gail Wright, in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. They had both been out there to visit. I was not aware of any other in particular.
And were you aware on those trips whether or not the justices travel with their spouses?
I don't recall, Mr. Chairman. Maybe, and I'll just correct myself, I was aware of one trip that Justice Scalia took with Mr. Don Wright that involved hunting. I think they were quail hunting somewhere, perhaps even in South America, I'm not sure.
Thank you. Mr. Sherman, would you speak to this question? There's been some public reporting about this as well. Currently, are Supreme Court justices permitted to take trips, private trips with individuals can be valued at thousands of dollars without disclosing that benefit?
They are. There is a gift ban statute, but the regulations that apply to lower court judges do not apply, or the justices of the Supreme Court are not bound by that. And so essentially what you have is justices accepting gifts based on whether they choose to accept them or not. And, everybody loves free trips. But certainly at the highest court in our land, we should have a transparent process for the justices to resolve those conflicts of interest.
Of course, taking free trips from right-wing donors who are pushing a very specific cultural ideology. Really, it's just theocracy. I mean, that's what it breaks down to. Taking free trips is one of the worst things you can do as a judge, and that's why the statutes all prevent every other level of judge really in the country, certainly federal judges, but I imagine states have similar statutes, because you don't want people to lose faith in the judiciary because they're unelected, they're making incredibly consequential decisions, and you want there to be this veneer that this is just a function of the law. The law is driving this. So the free trips are a bad look, without a doubt. But also understand that there was a concerted effort, in some ways clandestine, because I don't know how much the Supreme Court justices were aware of the ones that they were working on. I mean, clearly Clarence Thomas knew that Schenck was sort of organizing these sort of like lobbying efforts, and lobbying in the sort of the most sort of clandestine way of like, just be friends with them, befriend them, socialize with them. We will feed you talking points. We will feed you arguments. We will feed you this, and they deliver it. And over time, as the social circle just surrounds, I mean, who knows what the judge's perception is of like, when you hear Alito speak and he talks like essentially like somebody who's just been sitting in a room listening to Sean Hannity, and there's a reason for it, because there have been like people surrounding him and pushing him in this direction. I imagine Supreme Court justices are rather sequestered. The idea of getting a free trip to go somewhere with the really wealthy people and being surrounded in that way.
What was Kavanaugh's baseball ticket thing, like $90,000? I'll just say, like, if you're doing international hunting trips, you are going to eclipse that very quickly.
Yep. And I imagine that was just the beginning, his baseball ticket being paid off. Somebody's doing this, and now we have a better sense of who it is. And this last one, we have one more clip. This one is where Schenck is basically arguing that. What is this? Where is he? What is he saying here? Is
Number 7?
Yes.
This is where he outlines that it also extended to Republican officials, actually, like partisan officials, essentially outlining that we will help you achieve your goals of overturning.
Oh, yes. Okay, right. Oh, yeah, okay. In this instance, this isn't so much about specifically about the influence on the court. This is where we hear Robert Schenck, again, former head of an anti-abortion organization whose donors had basically infiltrated the social circles of Supreme Court justices and traded information both ways. This is really interesting because this gives a window into the relationship between the fundamentalist theocratic right and just the sort of like big business corporate right of the right in this country. And this is the deal that was struck. Like, you know, people have surmised this. It's interesting to hear it being explicitly laid out. Listen to this.
Very telling event. A meeting inside the U.S. Capitol with Republican Party operatives and a number of leading evangelical spokespersons, institutional leaders, ministry heads from across the country. And in that meeting that I participated in, the conversation went something like this. You guys want Roe v. Wade overturned. We can do that for you. But you take the whole enchilada. You take the whole thing. You take everything else that comes with it. Because if you want Roe gone, you have to work with us. So you take it all. I was at the table and I watched my colleagues nod uncomfortably, but from that point on, the community that I had served and still do made a deal with the devil. And that deal was that we would support everything on the conservative agenda, whether or not we had conscientious conflict with it. The means were justified by the end of that.
I mean, this is something that I think people have broadly speculated, but I don't know that I ever anticipated it was this explicit at any given point. It's interesting. There's a lot of things to talk about in this regard. One is, I mean, essentially he's saying, you know, we wanted abortion. That was our number overriding thing. We saw this play out in 2016, right? I mean, and Mitch McConnell understood this dynamic. We leave this seat open and we put a repeal of Roe v. Wade on the table, and we're going to bring out the theocratic right in this country full force to vote for someone who on every other sort of like, you know, box that you could imagine was not a particularly good Christian in Donald Trump. But the dynamic is abortion über alles, and they will take all of it. And I don't know which things that he found reprehensible about the conservative agenda. Maybe it's being anti-immigrant. Maybe it's racism. Maybe it's just tax cuts for wealthy. Maybe it's
Trump's personality.
But this seems like it has nothing to do with Trump and pre-Trump.
Right.
That this is really just a function of, cutting support for, I don't know, for poor children. I mean, it could have been anything that they had objections to. But the idea that he, even at the time, there was discomfort that he's talking about, suggests to me that there were, they made the deal. They wanted abortion rights to be stripped from Americans, and that was the biggest, most important thing. It also speaks to why Republicans are much more cohesive. The other reason is they're 90% white, and they are generally wealthier, and so they have more aligned interests, as it were. But this gives you a sense of the way that they maintain discipline, voting bloc discipline. There is no really equivalent, even abortion rights, within the Democratic Party, as salient as they are. There's really no sort of equivalency. But it's an interesting dynamic.